when you talk about public health under COVID, some things they never talk about is diet and exercise. How are you going to solve public health when you're not talking about two root level problems? They're not. They're making everything worse. I don't understand how people don't realize this. And when it comes to climate change, there's two things that you'll very rarely, I'm not going to say never, but very rarely hear them talk about. One of them is the sun. If you've ever heard of the sun, it's that thing in the sky that heats us all up. When it comes to the equation of how hot or cold the planet is, especially on the whole scale, you can't do it without the sun. The sun is everything. That's why people in the past used to pray to it like a god, because it heats our planet. So they never talk about the sun, which is the thing in the equation that is literally the most important heat source that's out of our control, as far as we all know. And they also never talk about planting trees. You very rarely hear them talk about, well, we have too much carbon. So there's something called a tree that really, it sucks up oxygen and it spits out, it sucks up a carbon and it spits out oxygen. Trees are amazing. Humans are amazing. Trees and humans have this perfect relationship where we breathe in, they breathe out. They breathe out, we breathe in. It's a beautiful thing. I love trees. That's why some people say, Anomaly, you look like a hippie. I'm a traditional hippie. You might see me hugging a tree, body surfing in the ocean at 9 o'clock. I'm that type of hippie. I'm not like a commie, let me steal your money and take your guns type hippie. I'm like I want to give a tree a hug because I appreciate oxygen type hippie. So they never talk about that. And it's the same with COVID. It's so simple that you almost think it's wrong. You're like, well, no, it's got to be a bigger issue. Of course it is. On a planet scale, there's a lot of carbon, there's a lot of oxygen, et cetera. There's a lot of noble gases. But it is that simple where you're like, well, what if we planted 1 trillion trees? Would that solve it? They have machines now. They don't even need them, but they have machines that actually suck out carbon and spit out oxygen. There's innovation, inventions. There's ways to solve these crises that way. They don't want to solve the crisis, though. It's the same thing with COVID-19. They really relate in the sense of there's a way to make people healthier. They don't want to do it. There's a way to really boost people's immune system, get all the vitamins you need, be as strong as you can, make sure your body has, less fat, more muscles, so you're able to, live longer, et cetera. There's ways to really combat this on a scale to live longer and be healthier. They don't want to do it. And it's the same with climate change, because if they solve the issue, then the whole thing runs away. And same with, it's like they want this to just linger over your head, so they have an excuse for the next 100 years to treat you like a slave, an animal, and a peasant. It's like, okay, the second story I want to talk about is the US Omicron real quick. And once again, I don't want to, this is not to make people feel bad whether you're vaccinated, unvaccinated. If you got the vaccine or you didn't, I want you to be happy. I want you to be healthy. You're going to be happy. You're going to be healthy. You need a positive mindset. Don't worry about it. But I just point this out to show you that their never-ending scheme isn't meant to end. So it's been reported by the CDC that out of 43 people with the Omicron variant, 34 have been fully vaccinated. 14 of them had received a booster shot. And here's the little mind matrix that they have everybody caught in. So if unvaccinated people, if something bad happens to someone unvaccinated, Joe Rogan gets sick for 3 days, somebody dies or whatever, they look and they say, see, the unvaccinated are causing it. They're spreading it. They're the worst. You're going to die. You have to get vaccinated. So if something happens to an unvaccinated person, of course, they blame them and say, well, you needed to get it. If something happens to vaccinated people, whether they, find new variants in them, they're the carriers of the new variants, they're getting sick, they're getting hospitalized, they're dying, then they say, well, you need a booster shot, and you got a booster shot. Well, Omicron's there, so the CEO of Pfizer says that it's time for a fourth booster shot. So it's like a never-ending matrix. It's like a choose-your-own adventure. If something happens to an unvaccinated, blame the unvaccinated. If something happens to the vaccinated, you don't blame the vaccine. You blame the fact that they didn't get enough vaccination. So it's like a matrix to keep you on a hamster wheel forever. And if something happens in a vaccinated person, they still blame unvaccinated people. You have propagandists like Jim Cramer probably just reading a script that he's too dumb to write himself. And then they just keep you on the cycle. It's like you get 4 boosters, a new variant comes. Well, you need a new one. You just need to keep going. It's never going to end because you get what I'm saying? I know people, and this has been a really beautiful thing. Like there's people in my family who got the vaccine, who didn't. I have a mixed bag. Luckily, my family's great and nobody really bothers anybody. But everybody in my family that got vaccinated, I haven't talked to a single person that wants a booster shot. And I don't judge them. They don't judge me. You get what I'm saying? Like I don't have that type of family that says, you can't eat for dinner. I'm very grateful to have a good family that made their own decisions and we don't make each other feel like dirt. But everybody that I've talked to in my family says, I'm not getting a booster shot. I did my part, or I thought I did my part. And now they're talking about this, that. I have family members that I'm talking to now that got vaccines that they're not wearing a mask in the Apple store. Like they're tired of it, and this has been a great to see some to talk to some people, because I'm like, good, this is never going to end whether you got the shot or not, which I've been talking about for months, until enough people realize that it's not meant to end. So that's kind of my thing with COVID-19. They never talk about diet. They never talk about nutrition. They never talk about sunlight. They never talk about exercise. They took away all those things. They probably or definitely killed more people than they saved, just off of the bare math of how many medics they diverted, how much poverty they created, how much inflation they created. These people are going to end up killing. They're going to end up killing more people than Stalin and Hitler. Just do the math. If inflation keeps rising, if poverty keeps rising, if the middle class gets sucked away, if you count all the excess tuberculosis deaths, if you add up all the missed cancer screenings, if you add up all of the childhood obesity, I mean, these people are mass murderers. They just won't stop. And it's like, in general, it's like, well, as soon as people stop being scared of Omicron, there's going to be a new thing, and then people are going to have to get the new vaccine. And then, now we need to start talking about climate change. But I want to read, and I'm not really a fan of Russia per se. That's not my country. I know they're always like, everybody's a Russian bot. We'll talk about that. But he said it perfectly. He said, this is turning a scientific and economic issue into a politicized question, and it will give the council a pretext to intervene in virtually any country on the planet. That's the UN trying to pass a resolution linking climate change to security. So they're using climate change in the same way they're using COVID. And I'm sorry, NPR, who writes stupid articles about me, it's not a conspiracy theory. They write about it in books. They brag about it. Do you guys remember, real quick before I move on? NPR wrote a stupid article about me, and they said Anomaly is a conspiracy theorist who thinks that the government is using the pandemic to have more control, or it's a conspiracy theory that governments around the world are using the pandemic to get more control. It's not even a theory. It's a fact. Just look around. Is Australia not using the pandemic to have more control? It's not even debatable. This is not even like a left-right conversation. I'm factually correct, and you guys are idiots. Like the real debate is governments around the world are using the pandemic for more control. That's a fact, what I said. Now the debate is it justified or is it unjustified? I think it's clearly unjustified. They think it's clearly justified, but there is no debate that they're using it for government control. So they're starting to do the same thing with climate change. Use climate change as an excuse. I'm not saying it's not real. Everybody knows climate change is real. The sun goes up, the climate changes. The sun sets, it gets colder. Winter, spring, summer, fall, Ecuador, America, Vermont. The climate change is real. Ice caps grow, ice caps melt. Hurricanes hit. There's no debate on climate change. Of course, the climate's always changing every day, every second, every week, every month. It's a beautiful thing. Now the question is, are you using it to establish some sort of global control? And are you solving the problem? Just because you make a product doesn't mean you cured COVID. Just because you shut down businesses doesn't mean you're helping people with their health. This is the disconnect, but these people know what they're doing. Maybe not the idiots who work at NPR, but a lot of these people running the show, they know what they're doing. It's just these little minions they have at like social media. Maybe they're too dumb to know what they're doing. It's like, there is no debate if they're using this for control. The debate is, are they actually solving the problem? I want to look at climate change and be honest about it. Okay, let's sit down at the UN. What's going on? The climate's changing. How? Well, glaciers are melting. Well, which ones? Because you said the Jacob-Shavin Glacier was one of the fastest thinning glaciers on the planet. And the Jacob-Shavin Glacier grew 3 years in a row. And then National Geographic wrote an article, and they said the world's fastest thinning glacier is actually growing. Here's why it's not a bad thing. It's the same thing when like COVID cases are going down. COVID cases are going down. Here's why you should be afraid. Here's why it never ends. This is who these people are. So it's like, okay, the climate's changing. How's it changing? It's getting hotter here. It's getting colder here. Okay, how do you think you're going to solve it? Well, there's too much carbon. Is there? Okay, are we sure about that? If we're sure about that, why don't you try planting some trees? Because trees actually suck it in and then they spit out oxygen. Trees are pretty off. But they're not interested in planting trees. They're not interested in talking about solutions like the new machines they have to do even more work than trees. Because if they solve the problem, they can't hang it over your head and they can't take control. And I've read the book of Klaus Schwab and many of the people running the show, but especially that book. It's not a theory. I don't have conspiracy theories about Klaus Schwab. Other people do. Other accounts make up whatever they want, or they post pictures of them. In my opinion, that's their First Amendment right, not to do like libel and slander, but in general, if they have a educated opinion, I think that's allowed. But I'm not even giving you, I'm reading his book. I didn't write his book. I didn't write a book about him. He wrote a book about himself. He wrote a book about his own agenda. It's called COVID-19, The Great Reset. There is no conspiracy theory about it. Maybe people make up bad ones, but I don't need to make up a theory. I read his book. In his book, he has this little graph, this little chart that he made or somebody made, and in the middle is climate change. And he talks about climate change. And just 20, 30 pages later, he starts talking about what he thinks about the world. He doesn't like capitalism. He calls it neoliberalism, but he's really talking about free market competition. And he's like, what we really need is bigger government, more control. So when they bring up these UN resolutions and they say, well, climate change is a threat to global security and pandemics are a threat to global security. And the only way to solve these issues is by giving us more money, more power, more control, and the ability to come into your country and tell you what to do. And then you're like, nah, I don't want to do that. And they're like, what do you need to be censored? Are you a conspiracy? No, that's what they're doing. This is what these people want to do. We in America, not everybody, but a lot of people in America, we believe in the freedom of speech, the right to bear arms. We like the idea of having less government. In states like Tennessee, Alabama, Texas, Florida, etc., people actually want the federal government off of their back. And I personally, you don't have to agree with me, but I think that's a great idea. I'm very grateful that I live in America, not Australia. But people like Klaus Schwab, he doesn't make it hard to figure out who he is. And the people that are at the UN, they want a different type of system. They don't want sovereignty. They don't want Africa rejecting vaccines. They don't want America not having mandates. They don't want Florida open for business. They don't want Texas rejecting some of their mandates. They don't want that. They want a one world government, just like out